Good afternoon. It might be morning for you, and welcome to the Water Talk on Wednesday, April 14th, 2021. I'm Mary Hunt here at Water, and I'm with my colleagues, Annalie Martin, who can raise her hand, who is part of the Mennonite Voluntary Service Program, and Diane New, the other co-director of Water, who is with Joe Cinto, who is the volunteer extraordinaire. And we have just had a nice lunch together here at the Water office, and we've been looking forward to this presentation. So thanks to all of you for joining us. Our topic today is a new book entitled The Gathering, a Womanist Church, Origins, Stories, Sermons, and Litanies, authored by our guests, Irie Lynn Session, Kamilah Hall-Sharp, and Jann Aldredge-Clanton. The book was published in 2020. It's available from the publisher, which is Wilp and Stock, as well as Amazon, if anybody's still using Amazon. We're delighted to welcome all three of you for what I'm sure will be a wonderful learning experience for all of us. And I hope those who are joining have had an opportunity to at least peruse the website, as was suggested in the materials that went out before this. You will want to do that after the conversation if you haven't had an opportunity already. This is an important book about an important project, and we at Water are very delighted and very honored to have the authors with us. Like all of Water's efforts, this Water Talk is not simply an academic seminar. It's a way to learn in order to bring what we learn to the creation of a more just and equitable world. By learning about this model of ministry, unique and effective as it is, we can all get ideas for our own work, as well as support this very, very signal project in Dallas, Texas. Let me first go over the format of our program this afternoon. I will introduce the speakers. They will then have about 25 minutes to present the materials in their book and other things that they may wish to share with us. And then we'll have plenty of time for dialogue, for question and answer and discussion. It's the usual Water Talk format. So please listen and enjoy. Have your lunch if you want. We'll take notes, which will be on our website shortly after our guests have a quick look at them. And they can add anything we might have missed or anything that they'd like to add after the fact. We'll put that up on our website along with the recording of this event, and you can share it with your friends. These kinds of recordings make a wonderful tool, both for classes, for congregational groups, for learning in many, many settings. So please feel free to go to our website, www.waterwomensalliance.org, and avail yourself of our resources. If you go under programs, there'll be a listing of the various programs. For example, the meditation that was presented by Rosemary Ganley the other night on diminishment and other things that I will mention. So please feel free to do that. Annalie will see to it that our audio is muted to cut down on noise and assure a clear line for the presentation. When our speakers finish, you can join the conversation and we'll give you further instructions on how to do that shortly. We will end at 2 p.m. Eastern Time to respect everyone's schedule. You can re-listen and point other people to this, as I mentioned, but we'll also keep the Zoom line open for a little bit after 2 o'clock for those who wish to continue conversation. The official session will end at 2 with deep gratitude to our speakers and respect for their time and for their talent. I turn now to introductions and a warm welcome to our speakers. I hope you had a chance, as I said, to take a look at the website to peruse this very important project that I think has great promise for lots of people. Let me introduce our speakers. First, we have the Reverend Dr. Irie Lynn Session, co-pastor of The Gathering, a Womanist church. She describes herself as a spiritual entrepreneur and chief illuminator of Dream Big courses. I love the title, Dream Big. She holds a Master's of Divinity with a certificate in Black Church Studies and a Doctorate in Ministry degree in prophetic preaching and transformative leadership. Our second speaker is Dr. Kamilah Hall-Sharp, a native of St. Louis, Missouri, currently residing in Texas with her spouse, Nakia, and her daughter, Anaya. She's co-pastor of The Gathering, this womanist church in Dallas, and a PhD candidate in biblical interpretation, Hebrew Bible, at Bright Divinity School. Reverend Sharp holds a Bachelor of Science in Business Economics, a Master of Divinity, and a Juris Doctorate degree. We welcome both of you very warmly, and we welcome back the Reverend Dr. Jann Aldredge-Clanton, an ordained minister and author, co-chair of Equity for Women in the Church, a ministry partner of the gathering. And note the term ministry partner. There are no members of the congregation. There are no parishioners at the gathering. There are simply ministry partners. Lesson 1 today of a new way of doing things, which I think is very effective. Jann is adjunct professor at Richland College and co-leader of New Wineskins Community. Her books include Praying with Christ Sophia, Changing Church, and Inclusive Songs for Resistance and Social Action. And we know her both for her music as well as for her writing. Many water people will recognize her from an earlier Water Talk, most recently the program about the book entitled Building Bridges, Letha Dawson Scanzoni and Friends, which she co-authored with Kendra Weddle, who's also with us today. You can find the audio of that program and the notes under Water Talks December 2020. Jann's been on here before as well. So we're just delighted to have you back, Jann. You're like a regular. Let me read what the authors say about their book. They say a womanist church has great power to transform church and society, particularly because womanist theology centers the experience of Black women while working for the survival and wholeness of all people and all creation. Experiences of the triple oppression of racism, sexism, and classism give Black women an epistemological insight into recognizing injustice and creating solutions that benefit all. The gathering, they write, is unique, the only church founded and identified as womanist, applying womanist theology to the full life and worship of a church. The gathering, a womanist faith community, they write, in Dallas, Texas, welcomes all people to partner in pursuing racial equity, LGBTQ equality, and dismantling patriarchy, misogyny, and sexism, following Jesus in liberating the oppressed and lifting up the marginalized. And here's how we at Water blurbed the book when we first read it. How exciting to see womanist ministers and theologians creating communities in which to live out their rich insights and commitments. This volume offers the practical aspects like preaching, the challenges of developing groups, and the fruits of this new emerging approach to church. Hats off to them, we concluded. This past weekend, the Katie Geneva Cannon Center for Womanist Leadership sponsored a conference entitled The Hinges Upon Which the Future Swings, the Living Legacy of Womanism as a Gateway to Our Futures. I can tell you it was an extraordinary event, which I hope will get widespread coverage. The gathering that we're going to talk about now looks to me like one of those hinges on which our future swings. Welcome and thank you to Reverend Dr. Session, Reverend Sharp, and Reverend Dr. Aldredge-Clanton. We are in your capable hands, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Greetings. We are so excited to have this opportunity to share with you. We thank you for the invitation and for your wonderful words about our book. It makes my heart sing. But we're going to talk this morning afternoon for most people, about our book, The Gathering, a Womanist Church. But before we get into the books, I want to go to the next slide for me. So our book, just, a general overview, it tells the story about our church. It was written by the co-pastors, but it was also written by ministry partners. But we wrote this book because we needed to tell our story. We believe it's important for one person to tell their own story, because when other people tell your story, it may not end up looking like your story. But we also wanted to share what we learned and provide that information on womanist ecclesiology, because when Dr. Irie started researching this, she found plenty of information on feminist ecclesiology, but there was nothing on womanist ecclesiology, and we knew that was something that needed to change. We felt that it was important that this information is shared. But we also wanted to do this book to write this book with our ministry partners to, again, model community. We are very big in modeling community. As Dr. Hunt said, we don't have members at the gathering. We have ministry partners because we believe we are partnering with God, and we believe we are partnering with each other to do this work together. And because we believe in a non-hierarchical model of ministry, we thought if we were going to tell our story at the gathering, it was important that we did it as a community. And so first, I have to tell you how our story begins. So we started, because we are a womanist church, I do not assume that everyone knows what womanist means, because I can't tell you how many times, every time we say a womanist church, people always say, well, does that mean only women can come? Are men welcome at this church? And I'm like, yes, we say where everyone is welcome, really. And we really do mean that. Everyone is welcome. Our church has more women, but so does every other church in the country or in the world for that matter, really. But womanist comes from the definition in Alice Walker's In Search of Our Mother's Garden, where she lays out a 4-part definition. I didn't put the whole definition, but the definition talks about a Black feminist or feminist of color who, usually referring to outrageous, audacious, courageous, who's responsible, in charge, and serious. But from this definition, as many of you on this call already know, womanist thought, went into several different things, from biblical interpretation to ethics to preaching, theology, and so many things. But for us, womanism is not just a discourse. It's our way of thinking. It is our way of life. It's our practice. And for me, I have to live out what I believe in my womanist thoughts. And so when I began learning about womanism and learning about womanist interpretation, it opened up my world. But it also affirmed me at the same time, because it gave me terminology about how I live my life and how I saw my mother live. But when we started thinking about this whole womanist thing, see, for us, womanism is communal. It's care for everybody, not just women, but for everybody. It's how, it's, excuse me, you can go back. Yeah. It's care for everybody. And we believe that using our experience as Black women in these all Black United States, where our daily existence lives in the intersection of white supremacy, sexism, and racism, we believe there is wisdom and there is liberation for all people, not just Black women, but for all people coming from this intersection. So when I first moved to Dallas to pursue a PhD in Hebrew Bible, I had a womanist project in mind. But when I got here, like every other city, because I've lived in several cities, when I get there, the first thing I want to do is find a church. And when I got here, I couldn't find one. I went to visit several churches, and we all know, as I heard you talking a few minutes ago, there are plenty of spaces where women are not allowed to preach. And I know these places exist. I've seen these places, but when I got to Dallas, it just seems like it was so much more prevalent. It seems to be like so much. And it was kind of shocking. For me, even my in-laws, they attended a very large church here in Dallas with well-known pastor, but they don't believe in women preachers. And I'm like, that's kind of odd, because here I am, a woman preacher. So we found ourselves in this paradox. So Dr. Irie, at the time when I got here, she had just started attending Central Christian Church, which is a predominantly white Disciples of Christ church. Dr. Irie and myself are both ordained DLC. And she was enjoying the church, and I joined her with a couple times. But as soon as we got there, the pastor, announced she was going to retire. And I was like, okay, not good, because my church in Memphis, I had just went through that with the pastor, and I was like, we're not going to do that. But we kept visiting churches, but we really couldn't find a space that spoke to our entire person. So Dr. Irie decided we should have a 7 last words service. You want to go to the next slide? So 7 last words is when it's a Good Friday service where preachers preach some of the 7 last sayings. And so Dr. Irie said, let's do a womanist 7 last words. And we had 7 womanist preachers from different denominations who preached 7 minutes on the 7th thing. Now, none of these women were pastoring or had any position in the church at the time, but we put on this event and it was a great turnout. We had a great turnout with a very diverse crowd. And after we finished preaching and after the service concluded, people came up and they kept saying, well, where can I hear more of you preaching. And we're like, well, really, you can't, because, you know, we weren't preaching in a place every Sunday, you know. And we continue to get more of these questions, because Dr. Irie even was traveling as far as New York, and people kept saying, well, where can we hear more of this? And we did not have a place to tell people, you can go hear more Womanist preaching here. And so at this point, my spouse began to say things like, well, you two should go ahead and plant a church. And I was like, no, thank you. You know, I was actually in coursework for my PhD, but first of all, you know, I didn't want a pastor ever in life. That was never an idea for me. But being in coursework, you know, I was barely keeping my head above water. You know, it's my first year coursework. I'm like, if I can get out the door, my daughter has on clean clothes, we both got our assignments, I'm winning. And the idea of adding a church to that just seemed too much to bear, even, you know, with it. But around this same time, Dr. Irie began getting a conversation with Reverend Blair Lavallee, who had also preached at the 7 last service. And she was leaving her church at the United Methodist Church. And we began to have conversations, because what would it look like if there was a space for people to hear and experience womanist preaching? How could that impact not only Dallas, but maybe the world? And so we began to have conversations, and you go to the next slide, Irie. And what we talked about when some of our first conversations are, what are the things that we really care about? What are the things that we really think people need to hear about that you can't, or you're not hearing in churches? And so these were our 3 missional priorities. We were talking about racial equity. We wanted to eliminate white supremacy. We believe you can do that one womanist sermon at a time as a way of doing it. We wanted to dismantle what we call PMS, patriarchy, misogyny, and sexism. But we also wanted LGBTQIA equality, because affirming and equality within the church and in society at large. And as we had these conversations, we realized that each of us were gifted in particular ways that complemented each other, but made us a great team together. And we also thought that when you're not doing this by yourself, you have more than one person, it makes it much more possible and bearable. I'll put it that way. And so we began to pray, and, you know, we decided, you start thinking about, well, if we did this, what would the space look like here in Dallas? And, you know, what we said is we definitely wanted womanist approach to preaching. You had to talk about social justice focus. You know, these were things that was important to bring about the transformation that we were seeking to do. Also, LGBTQ affirming were the things that all came. And so we began to pray and things and have conversations. And then we said, okay, well, let's do something about it. Get to the next one. And so we decided, we'll have a worship experience and see what happens. You know, there was no idea for me of a church, just a community where people could come and worship and hear womanist preaching. And I know probably some of you are saying, well, that's just a church, isn't it? You know, but in my mind, this was not a church. This was just a space, a community where people could come and enjoy and experience womanist preaching. And so Dr. Irie and myself, as I said, we're both DLC. And so she sent out an email to our area minister and asked him to see if any churches would give us what we were calling like permanent nesting space, because we were doing this with just us and no money. So that's important. And so we got 5 responses within the first hour of people offering us spaces. But the spaces were a little bit further than we really wanted to be, but we were keeping it in consideration. And then the then new pastor of Central Christian Church, where Irie was at that point a member, said, you know, offered us space. And we figured that was the best space because they're centrally located. We had relationship with them. We both preached there. But, you know, so we figured this was a space. So with the space, we had to think about, well, what are we going to do? How does this look? And so we began to plan what we called a worship experience, where we were going to do it in 1 hour, but we were going to do it on Saturday for several reasons, because here in Dallas, there are nothing less than 3 million churches on every corner. And so we, you know, it wasn't necessarily Dallas needed another church on Saturday. But what I did realize is when I was in Memphis, there were a lot of churches that offered Saturday services where people would go on Saturday. And also I knew from being at Bright and being in relationship with other people who are in ministry, there were there were people who are in ministry that were seeking to have place to be able to worship, where they didn't have to show up to work because that was their job to show up on Sunday. So we wanted to do a 1 hour service, and we really wanted it to be 1 hour. We were going to do a communion because we're disciples, and disciples, we have communion every week. Of course, it was going to be womanist preaching. And then we were going to add what we eventually called talk back to the text. Because what we recognize is every week when people preach, pastors don't, or preachers don't realize you say a lot to people in your 10 to 45 minutes that you preach. And people take that in, and we don't know how it lands on their body, how it lands in their mind, how it lands in their spirit. And what happens is they'll shake your hand and say, "Good sermon, Pastor," and walk out the door, and they have all these questions, all these thoughts that they wrestle with. Sometimes you might get an email, especially if you say something they didn't like. But in general, people don't get to 10. So what happens, because for us in a womanist thing, questioning is important. We want people to recognize that being able to ask questions is important, to even be able to question God, to be able to question the Bible. That's important for their own self. And so we said we'd have this time. We allowed them to ask us questions about what they just heard, the sermon. How do you make connections? Do you have questions about the way I interpret it? And that became like the best part of the service. People loved that because they had never had that opportunity to do that. And so that became, and also what we decided in our first service too was we were going to go Facebook Live. But the first service we said we can't stream the whole service, because if we stream the whole service, nobody will show up. So we streamed part of the service, and then we cut it off right at the sermon. And so you can go to the next slide. After our first service, it was great. We had, good. The picture on the left is a picture of our first service. We were intentional also. Our first service, when we first started out, we were in the fellowship hall because, again, we didn't want this to feel like church, because the people we were appealing to were usually people who've been hurt by church. And so we felt like if we've been in a fellowship hall, we did a circle to make it feel, communal, but we had a great turnout. People enjoyed it. And we were like, okay. So we did a tag team preaching where all three of us preached for like 7 minutes, talked back to the text. It was great. It was like, okay, this was great. So let's try it again next week. And so the next week we was like, are people going to show up? Because, we had advertised the first week for weeks before, but this was the second one. So people showed up. And then it became a joke. This is the week is people are not going to show up. But every week people showed up. And usually a new person showed up. But then we got to December, and Central rents out their space to a lot of different organizations. And an organization had rented out the fellowship hall before we even started there. So they were like, well, you're going to have to go into the sanctuary. And I was like, I really didn't want to go in the sanctuary, because I thought our people wouldn't like that. Because again, I'm thinking these are people who didn't want to be in church. But when we got there, the sanctuary is beautiful. They loved it. And, I realized people who are even hurt by church still want to be in church a lot of times. And so we decided, okay, and this is when I say we became church, is in December, because we were like, okay, this is really a church now. And Dr. Irie was like, you know what, we're not just a church, we're a womanist church. And I said, okay, we're a womanist church. And we became the first womanist church in, here. But the other important thing I have to say is in this thing is around this time, we also began to embrace our online presence, because what we recognized is people, we were still getting more and more people joining us online who were not from Dallas, and people who wanted to join in the talk back to the text. And so we began to embrace that, and also, call what we call online gatherings, because at this point we had people from all over the country. Actually, it was a lady in Ireland watching us at this time. Who were watching us. And so we had to figure out how to navigate a church in person and a church with online with people. And I think, it helped us out, because when the pandemic hit, we were already used to a digital space. So we didn't struggle in pivoting to a fully virtual service. And I think because we started out that way, it helped us. Of course, when we started out that way, nobody knew it was going to end up like this, but it helped us become a church that's, a virtual church. And now we have ministry partners from all over the country. We just had a lady join us, a pastor, because that's the other thing. As I keep saying, we have a lot of pastors and ministers who join us because they want a space to be fed also and to experience womanist preaching, because it's not a lot of spaces you can do that. And so that's how we became church. But after we became church, Dr. Irie, you want to talk about what you figured out?
Yes. So thank you, Reverend Kamilah, for telling our story so beautifully. I love hearing it through your eyes and through your heart. And so we became a church, a full-on church. And I began thinking about the theological underpinnings of what we were doing. And as Reverend Camilla said, I had become, and we had become familiar with the work of Letty Russell, Church in the Round, understanding, interpreting church from a feminist perspective. I had read Introducing Feminist Ecclesiology by Natalie Watson. And so there were all of these, well, not all, but several resources and books on feminist ecclesiology, right? But we were not feminists, we were womanists. And I could not find any writing or material on a womanist ecclesiology. What does it mean when womanists, Black women who hold a particular perspective and see life through a particular lens, what does it look like when we do church, when we are church, as Natalie Watson says. She says women are church, right? We don't just go to church, but we are church. And so what does it look like for what is a womanist ecclesiology? So I set out to discover that, and using the gathering as a model, because we wanted, our goal in the beginning and even now is for this to be a legacy, for this to be something, for the gathering to be a way that particularly Black clergy women who are womanists can create their own spaces, their own worship communities, and not feel so beholden to necessarily denominations, because it is, when you look around, particularly I can speak of our denomination, the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, there are very few Black clergy women who are senior pastors of thriving and growing congregations that are already established. And so we wanted to present a model for other Black women to be able to create such spaces, should they be called by God to do so. And we also wanted and saw what we were doing and what God was helping us to create. We saw it as a strategy for resistance, right? To resist what Bell Hooks calls white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, right? Which really is all the ways in which the intersectional ways that Black women are marginalized and oppressed in society, right? Because we're impacted by racism, right? We're impacted by sexism. We're impacted by heterosexism and capitalism, all of those at one time, right? And so we saw what we were doing as a strategy for resistance to those oppressive systems. And so in seeking, let me see, did I miss something? I want to go in a different order. Okay, so in order to do that, one of the things that I did was I applied for a grant from the Louisville Institute. It was a pastoral study project grant. And with this grant, my goal was to discover what it means to be and to pastor and to create a womanist church? What are the components of it? What does it look like? What does preaching look like? What does the infrastructure look like? And so I began thinking about, because there are no womanist churches, right, that have that as a title, but I knew of womanists who pastored churches that were out of the norm, that were not necessarily traditional, that modeled the womanist tenets of radical subjectivity, critical engagement, traditional communalism, and redemptive self-love, right? I knew that there were women who were doing that work. And so my grant gave Reverend Camilla and I an opportunity to travel to Middle Collegiate Church, where we spent time with Dr. Jackie, oh, what's her last name? I can't think. Lewis, Dr. Jackie Lewis here on the right at Middle Collegiate Church, right? And please be praying for Middle Collegiate. Many of you may know the church burned, and so they're in a resurrection, rebuilding phase now. But so we went there and we questioned her, we interviewed her, we saw the ministry that she's doing, and we asked a series of questions that helped us get at what we've come to understand as a womanist ecclesiology. And then I had an opportunity to go to Rise Community Church in Atlanta, where Dr. Maisha Handy is the pastor, and spent some time with her, spent some time in worship, had an opportunity to speak, to learn. Then I went to St. Louis. There is a gathering of women there called Liwa Farabelle, and they have a very womanist approach and unusual way of gathering and meeting together and engaging in spiritual community. And what's not on here, I also had a conversation with Dr. Melva Sampson, who is a homiletician at Wake Forest Divinity School, and she has a digital worship experience called Pink Robe Chronicles. And she comes on, I think she's off of her hiatus now, but she comes on every Sunday morning on Facebook at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And she wears a pink robe and she preaches and she invites people, men and women, into community. And so in talking to and interviewing all of these pastors, these womanist preachers and scholars and theologians, it helped me to understand and to define a womanist ecclesiology. And so, let me go back here. And so I also learned from this phrase here, practical womanism, from a D-Min student at the time at Memphis Theological Seminary, Dr. Lynn Hayes. And she interviewed me about the work that we were doing at the gathering, because she felt like in her research that what we were doing was practical womanism. It took womanism out of the academy and made it real, put flesh and blood on it, saw how it would be lived out. And so from that and from my interviews with the other womanist preachers, I developed this definition of a practical womanist ecclesiology, which is what I believe we employ at the gathering, right? So a practical womanist ecclesiology is the performance, the acting out, right? How we do it, of a womanist hermeneutic, right? A womanist way of thinking, being, and doing life, right? In the everyday lived experiences of Black women, for the purpose of resisting oppression in its myriad manifestations, right? And to facilitate communal flourishing and wholeness for all people, right? And so here I have just a couple of examples of some of the ways we live that out, right? This scene, this picture up above here, that happened last week, right? So we were at we're part of, Reverend Camilla and I, and our church is a part of Dallas Black Clergy, where for safety, equity, and justice, right? So we are very concerned about equity and justice in Dallas. And so we went to the White House. I mean, not the White House. We went to the Capitol, right? Because we have concerns about voter suppression, right? And so last week, we were at the Capitol, and I was one of the speakers. And so we are that's how we live out, right? That womanist ecclesiology. Then this picture below, there was isn't this the transgender woman? Yeah. There was a transgender woman in Dallas who was brutally attacked, and we were standing in solidarity with her. And so those are that's living out our ecclesiology. And there are a myriad other ways that we do that. So we balance social justice with charity, right? Because we also have a Fish and Loaves ministry, where our ministry partners meet once a month and they prepare home-cooked meals. And then they take those downtown Dallas to feed people who are home and food insecure. And so that's the charity piece of it, but it's married to the social justice piece of it, right? And so those are some of the ways that we live out, that we make practical our ecclesiology. And so I think this is my last slide. And so as a result of my work, I discovered, and I'm not going to go into detail about all of these. You can feel free to ask me questions if you want me to explain any of these, because I know we're, coming up on my time. But I discovered 6 characteristics that a womanist ecclesiology would embody, right? So a womanist ecclesiology is artistically expressive, right? So in all of those churches that I visited and all of those faith communities that I visited, you saw the beauty of art, whether it was portraits, whether it was the color schemes, whether it was even at the gathering. Every week we're very intentional about the graphics that we use to show and express our sermons, right? Full of rich colors. And artistically expressive, you may see dance, you may see poetry, you may hear poetry as spoken word. So a womanist ecclesiology is artistically expressive. It has a social justice orientation. All of these communities are engaged in some kind of social justice work. It's not just charity. It's not just, feeding the homeless. It's not just, it is trying to impact systems of oppression. And then there is this, what I call a communal Christology, right? It is not an individual kind of salvation, transformation. It is about it's about seeing Christ as out in the street, right? It is seeing Christ and following a Jesus that is concerned about what happens outside of the temple, right? And not only that, but it is about this womanist notion of traditional communalism, right? About a concern for the survival and wholeness of everyone. So it is not just about Black women. Our congregation is racially diverse. Our congregation, and all of these congregations had a mixture of people and lifestyles that attended. I also believed and discovered that a womanist ecclesiology is what I call organically trauma-informed, right? So in my previous life, I was a social worker. And very interested in trauma-informed pastoral care, trauma-informed ministry. And so what that means is a trauma-informed approach looks at what has happened to a person rather than what the person has done, right? So we are concerned as womanists about all of a person's life, right? How these structures and systems of oppression have impacted them, right? The trauma that they have experienced. And then we approach them, we approach people from a sort of listening and learning perspective rather than a judgmental kind of perspective, right? I discovered Womanist Ecclesiology to really hold to a universal God, right? God is the God of all people, right? And so that means that what I discovered was the womanists often had and were in touch with their African heritage, with some components of African religious traditions that were employed in even some of the worship experiences. And then finally, a womanist ecclesiology has womanists as the primary proclaimers, right? Because there is a particular lens and a particular way that womanists interpret the biblical text, right? That is necessary and that is transformative. And so I think that's it. Oh, so let me define, thank you, Reverend Camilla, a womanist ecclesiology, right? So it is ways of thinking theologically about the doing and being church that take into account the norms, practices, ethics, wisdom, survival strategies, and lived experiences of Black women, which lead to the liberation and thriving of all people. So that's who we are, and that's what we're trying to live into. Jann, you want to take it away?
Thank you so much, Reverend Camilla and Dr. Irie. Such wonderful, thorough explanations, and you can tell the rest of you how rich and deep this is, so it's hard to get it in a short time. I'm just going to take a minute or two so we can open up the Q&A, but I want to whet your appetites for the ministry stories, ministry partner stories in the Gathering book. And we do have several ministry partners on this, and so in Q&A they may want to add something, but I did become a ministry partner, even though to begin with, I went to the Gathering just to facilitate collaboration with other groups like Christian Feminism Today, Equity for Women in the Church, New Wineskins Community, to do justice work by using my white privilege to support the womanist mission, which I so believe in. But I soon realized I need the Gathering for my own healing and growth from racism, from white supremacist culture. And we're just going to have a few little quotes from several of the other ministry partners. You'll see the diversity of the ministry partners and the stories. So go ahead and advance the next slide. Okay, Reverend Winter Laws, who is now the Minister of Congregational Care and Support, says that womanism helps me live into my call in ways that are authentic and unique to my identity as a Black lesbian Christian preacher. I refuse to be silenced about my sexual orientation. I know God loves me because she created me. Okay, Alexander McLemore, I've never felt more affirmed in a spiritual dwelling my entire life. Every single aspect of my personhood as a Black woman is continually rendered visible each week of the Gathering. And Alexandra had quit going to church because she had felt so excluded and oppressed in other churches. So this is a breath of fresh air for her. Okay, and Von Trell, her mother, was so excited that her daughter was going to church with her. And Von Trell says, again, it was so edifying for me to see scholarly, wise, emboldened women crossing the border. Unapologetically Black women speaking truth to power was unbelievable. And Nomo Diab, the gatherings helped me form my identity as a man and as an African. Meeting with these powerful women and discussion about the practice of racism and sexism, I realized that womanists are trying to reach men in a different way, as well as empowering women. to be the best that they can be. So a womanist church is not just for women. Phil Lucy, with time and repetition, this straight white man has come to understand better the vision of womanism. It includes healing, wholeness for all people of any racial identity, any or no gender, any or no sexuality. So that's just to whet your appetite. So go to the Q&A.
All right, go to the last slide though, just so people have our website.
Sure.
Yeah, that's our website. So you can
Well,
write that down, or we can put it in the chat.
Yeah.
Well, yes, and just remember, friends, that all of this will be shared with you in the notes as well. We will send out notes which will include these materials. We've also had a request in the chat for how to purchase the book. And I want to thank our three speakers, Reverend Session, Reverend Sharp, Reverend Aldredge-Clanton, for a really tremendous presentation. And I want to congratulate you. And mostly I want to thank you for your work at the gathering, because you have given us not only insights into what you're doing, but why you're doing it. And this book, The Gathering, which I'm recommending highly, A Womanist Church, Origins, Stories, Sermons, and Litanies, is a treasure. And for those of you who are doing pastoral work, you will want to have this book. And I think you gave us a clue, dear sisters, this afternoon about how people who are in ministry can in fact avail themselves of being part of your church. And I have long said that the most neglected people in the Christian ministry are the ministers in terms of their own spirituality, their own spiritual life, and their own ability to be pastored to and with. And so what you offer is, you know, you might have to close the doors to get too many people. We start letting people know about them. Because you are answering a question that has been out there for a long time. And also, I would say another group that to look at is the spouses of pastors, because a lot of people, especially in small towns, are forced into the situation where their partner is their pastor. And although my partner is the best in the world, I would never think of her also as my pastor. I think that would be really very problematic to all of us. And I think that you're really solving another problem there as well. So I want to thank all of you for a really memorable presentation. And I want to take one more minute away from the Q&A. We will end, and since you're a 1 hour church, you understand my dilemma. We will end at the top of the hour, come as they say, hell or high water, and we will continue our conversation. But now the floor is open for conversation, for questions. I want to make a special welcome, a special warm welcome to your ministry partners who are with us today. We are honored and graced to have them with us. I also want to say that we are about 45 people. We include friends from Canada and from Ecuador, as well as other countries that I can't identify at the moment, but that's what your audience is today. So again, with a deep thanks, the floor is open. If you would like to ask a question, you can raise your hand and Annalie and I will keep an eye on that, or you can use the reaction button and raise your hand electronically as I have just done. So please keep your questions short and maybe say one word about yourself, and then we'll move right into Q&A as one after the other. The floor is open. Are you as excited as I am? We have been given a treasure today. Go ahead, the floor is open. I'm gonna start with Phoebe. Phoebe Knopf in Boston.
Hi, I'm just, thank you, Mary. I'm like overwhelmed with joy from Reverend Camilla, Dr. Irie, and Reverend Jann. And I really can't tell you how thrilling this is for me as a white person, unlearning racism and sexism and homophobia and militarism and all the other stuff we humans need to unlearn. I got most of that to work on. And I've just never conceived of being able to be a priest or a minister, because the idea of standing above people, talking for a while, and then structurally having it impossible for them to respond is hugely painful to me. And I don't want to participate in that any more than I have to. So I'm just thrilled about it. You healed my heart as far in my own life and in my love for the people of the world and for worship that's just and kind and equitable. So I was just wondering, also as a renegade high school English teacher, I was most thrilled by the talkback part of your Womanist Ecclesiology. And I just wondered if one of you might be moved to talk a little more about that concretely, about how that might have might be part of your transforming vision of church, and what maybe some of those conversations have been. Thank you.
Let's have a quick response to that. We'll move on with 2 more people, but please don't hesitate to answer the question, my friends. Go ahead, Dr. Irie.
Yeah.
No, go ahead, Kamilah.
I was gonna say, well, first thing, one of the things you said is, talking above people. One thing I didn't mention when I talked, actually, when we were in person, we didn't preach from the pulpit. We actually put a lectern down on the floor so we could be on the floor with the people to, again, model this is not a hierarchy, talk about being in a community. But when we have those conversations with people, initially, of course, it was difficult for people to open up because they're not used to that model. But what we've learned, we learned so much about people, but we also learn so much about ourselves in these things. Because, we tell people when they come preach, you really have to know your stuff. Because people are going to ask real questions. These are not like, and then the other thing is you really get to see people's lives and how what you're saying is connecting with their lives. It got so far that we had a sermon a few weeks ago that we had to do a talk back to the text part 2 because it opened up so much about vulnerability. But Dr. Irie, you want to add anything to that?
That was it. That was
Dr.
it.
Irie, okay.
It talked about, it's everything. I mean, it is everything.
Thank you.
One of the things that I like is that divinity schools and theological settings will learn from you. So that's why I call you Dr. Sharp.
Yeah. I just want to say on top back to the text, so many of the stories of the ministry partners say that that's one of the most compelling parts of the Womanist church. And the very first time I attended, I felt so welcome. At first I wondered, well, this white woman, am I invading some space that I shouldn't? But they're so welcome that I asked a question and talked back the text, and it was so well received and answered. So it is an extremely important part of the worship experience at the gathering.
Yeah. And I have to add, I know we got more question, but have to add, and it's not just because, again, about being intentional. My daughter will ask questions. We have,
Your 7-year-old daughter.
Yeah, well, she was then, but she ain't 7.
Oh, okay, yeah. 9 year. How? Yeah.
She asked real questions. But even a kid, Phil's son, the guy who said he's a white, his son, 5 years old, and he raises his questions. So to me, to empower children to learn to be able to ask their questions, because for many of us, we've been taught not to question God, and we've been, we have this thought that it's just me, or my question is dumb. So freeing people from that, it's important.
I can only think it must be a huge relief to God.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you all. And don't miss that Jann is rocking the t-shirt today. So there's advertising every place. We have a question from Jane Vaya and another one from Janet Bourne. So please go ahead, Jane, and then Janet.
I just wondered, I noticed today that your language about God was very inclusive language. It wasn't gendered. And is that part of your practice in your worship?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I talk about a woman's ecclesiology. I don't gender God. And if we do, it is balanced, right? It is mother, father, friend, parent, something like that. But yes, we're very intentional about that.
Even if you read the book, even in the litanies that, Dr. Jann, right? All of our stuff is very intentional, down to the children.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks for the responses. Janet Bourne and then Janice Johnson.
Very quickly, you sort of answered it. I was wondering how you bring the children and teenagers along, how you programs to teach them, to give them chances to practice. I just think it's wonderful. And I just wondered how you work with children and teenagers and all this.
Well, right now, because even when we were in person, we didn't have a children's church. Our kids were actually in service with us, and they sit there through the service. They ask questions, and then we have we do have a few teenagers, and one of them is just amazing young white girl who is just out here doing amazing things. But what I realize is, I think by them sitting in the service, not doing a separate service, they're hearing things that they would not hear and experiencing things that I think they would. What do you think, Dr. Irie?
Yeah, but they do more than just sit there, because Anaya will read announcements. She'll do a litany. So we let them, as much as they want, to participate in the service as well. So yeah,
and in other things, because like Ella, she's real big in doing our loaves and fishes.
Yeah.
So we just try to encourage them to participate. But that is a goal of ours, is to eventually have some type of programming. But I mean, just like there was no Womanist church, there's no Womanist children's church set up. So that's a whole separate thing that has to be created.
We know we know it's coming. Janice Jackson, you'll be next, please. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I just want to say very quickly, I don't know how I got the email that invited me to this conversation this morning, but it is a blessing, and it is exactly what I needed to hear. So I thank you for bringing this to us. I do work with developing educational leaders, and right now we're talking about many of the things that you have brought forward. And it's interesting that this is an incredibly difficult moment in history. Looking at the Chauvin trial, I ask everyone to please pray, because when that decision comes, no matter what it is, it's going to shake us all up. That's number one. But number two, to hear that your church is everybody, is living the gospel truly. And so I'm struggling with a lot of my young Black participants who think it's only about Black Lives Matter. And I'm like, no, Black Lives Matter is the window into resisting oppression, but it can't just be about Black lives. So I'm just grateful. And I'm going to be checking y'all out in the future. So you are my blessing today. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you. We do believe that. We do believe that it takes all of us. And we do, but we also believe that Black women have a particular insight and lens that is helpful and necessary for this work, right? That we have a lens and a perspective and strategies that others don't, that are effective and that need to be listened to and even followed. So yeah.
Thank you very much. We have other raised hands, and we will start after the break with Von Triel Mecklemore. We will start with you as soon as we end our official session, and that also will be recorded. So we'll just keep going. But I want to end our session both to conform with the 1 hour way that our colleagues have instructed us, and we have done for a long time, and also to respect the time and the agenda of each and every one who has taken the time to be with us for what I think I lowballed in my opening comments for how marvelous this would be. And I thought, oh boy, if anybody thinks I'm hyping this, they're going to be in for a big surprise, because it was far better than anything I could have begun in my opening praise, as it were. So I want to begin with deep thanks to the Reverend Dr. Session, Reverend Sharp, Reverend Dr. Aldredge-Clanton for this look into a creative project that is bearing abundant fruit already. And we're going to start charging a commission, by the way, for people who go to your church from water. So yeah, we're gonna be hyping this for you, because it really is important. And please consider getting the book, The Gathering: A Womanist Church, Origins, Stories, Sermons, and Litanies, from Wilf and Stock Publishers, published in 2020. That's in the chat. People have asked about it. And I hope that you will particularly avail yourselves of the sermons and the litanies as you do, some of you do your own ministry, because you will find models there that are just terrific. Again, thank you to our speakers. Thank you for joining us, all of you. We wish you safe and healthy days ahead, vaccines when you can get them and want them, and an enjoyable rest of your day. Good afternoon from Water, and we will simply continue our discussion on Zoom. So, Von Triel, are you there? And would you like to go ahead?
Yes, hi.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Please forgive me for not showing my face this morning. It's not presentable, but my spirit is here.
You are welcome as you come, my dear. Go right ahead.
Thank you very much. That is one of many pillars of the gathering. Come as you are, come who you are, come all. My daughter and I, we're there because of our disappointment and disillusionment with the traditional evangelical church. But the gathering, they do welcome everyone. The talk back to the text is a bold, audacious move. And I dare say that I've never seen it and probably will never see it from a male, white or black, from the pulpit. So that's something that we really enjoy. One question for Dr. Irie is you are a spiritual entrepreneur. How does that intersect with your gathering ministry and the vision that you have for your church?
Well, thank you, Mama Von Triel, for that question and for those comments. Early on, Mary had talked about funding for Womanist church, right? And that is becoming a spiritual entrepreneur is part of my strategy for being able to do this work, because we don't get paid enough right now as the gathering pastor for us to do this full time. It's not financially sustainable for us, and so part of my becoming a spiritual entrepreneur is to help augment that income. But it was also a response to the racial oppression that I experienced in the secular world, in the nonprofit world for many, many, many years, right? That I opted out of that and decided to kind of listen to God to help me excavate my latent skills and experiences and expertise in order to use those and leverage those to make money for myself, to make a living, to become economically autonomous, and so that's kind of how it goes together, because my coaching, my consulting, I do anti-racism training, I teach adjunct at two seminaries, about to be 3. And so that's how I make income so that I can continue to do the work that my soul must have, as Dr. Katie Cannon says. Yeah, so yeah. Was that helpful, Mama Von Triel?
Extremely helpful. And as you're answering it, I'm reminded that the Black woman is the most unprotected, the least appreciated, and also, here again, the underfunded, and the one in the society who is supposed to do more with less. So thank you, Dr. Irie, Dr. Session, Dr. Jann. God bless you all. Continue the good work.
Thank you. But I'm reminded of Mary again of what you said early on. You said it's amazing the things that women do in order to do the work their souls must have, in order to do ministry, right? I don't necessarily see what all that I do as drudgery. I am able to use all of who I am. I'm able to access and to be all of who I am in a lot of different ways. And so I love being able to do that. And I love having that freedom to do that. And that's what's important to us also as womanists, and for people to be free, right? To be who they are, and to be able to to speak, and to speak truth to power without fear of losing a job or losing funding or things of that nature.
Dr. Irie, I just want to underscore the quote that you had from the Reverend Dr. Katie Cannon of blessed memory. She talked about doing the work my soul must have. And someone at the conference over the weekend talked about having the soul my work must have.
Yeah, that was Dr. Stacey Floyd Thomas.
Stacey Floyd Thomas, that's right.
Student of Katie Cannon's, yes.
Yeah, it was a marvelous redaction of,
Yes.
of Katie Cannon's
Yes.
motto, and I really took that home too. That the other side of it, and the difficulty, and you pointed out the difficulty of holding in tension those things with the justice issues of the fact that we should be paid for the work that we do.
Absolutely.
And the disproportionate way in which Black, Latinx, and other women of color are not paid for the work that they do is really a serious matter. So it's holding that's the tension.
And that's another reason why at the gathering, we are very intentional. Even when we didn't have any money, everybody who preached or did something for us, we paid them.
That's right.
Because people are not paid, especially in churches, and Black women are not paid the way that they should be paid for. And so that's another thing that we are very intentional about.
That's right. That's right. And we just believe, right? We believe that God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. We believe that the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. And we just have faith. And I tell Camilla a lot because she has more faith than me. And I tell her I'm riding on her faith, which is working. And so we just believe that, if we are doing what God has called us to do, God will provide however God chooses to provide, whether that's us leveraging our skills, whether it's grants, whether it's whatever it is, we have had what we have needed. And we have often had more than what we have needed. We've had excess. We have enough to make sure we pay people. We're just intentional about that. It doesn't matter how much we may not see in our checking account. We're paying you because it's right.
One of the reasons this book came about at a vision night, we were talking about how we as ministry partners could help raise more money because we knew that the co-pastors weren't being paid enough, and we wanted the church to be so sustained because it's so important to all of us. And so I just threw out the idea, well, if we collected y'all's sermons, then we'd have a bestseller. And so then the book grew to be stories of ministry partners and the story of the gathering and litanies. But our dream is, and one of the ministry partners just spoke this, and I believe in speaking things into reality, that it's going to become a bestseller and it's going to help support the gathering. All of the royalties go to the gathering. Mm-hmm. And so, we hope that as we spread the message, more people will come to the gathering online, become ministry partners. And one of the responsibilities of ministry partners is to help support the gathering financially. And this is the reason I wanted to collaborate on this book. This is the work that my soul longs for. And so I've been so transformed by the gathering. Anyway, and Mom Von Trail did a fundraiser, an auction to help raise money for the gathering. So the ministry partners are active in helping to raise funds.
Right. And we hope, again, that people who are on this talk will be buying this book. We have made it available in the chat. We also hope that you'll be giving it to your own ministers and to your own colleagues in ministry so that they can learn from this experience. And now I'm going to invite one of my favorite ministers, Cindy Lapp from the Hyattsville Mennonite Church, to ask the next question. Go ahead, Cindy.
Hi, thanks. I have so appreciated what you've shared today about the gathering. And I guess I'm wondering how, if you're hearing if other womanist churches are starting around the country, or is that part of the thinking about the book, is that maybe some more congregations like yours can get started? Because certainly the kind of ecclesiology that you're talking about is really transformative and necessary and so faithful, I think, what the world needs. And so I guess I hope that's what can happen with the book, besides it being a bestseller. But I wonder if you have other dreams for it.
We hope that is a dream. That is something that we hope for. So far, I don't know of any others, but that doesn't mean they're not in formation or, but that is a hope for us.
What I will say, I wouldn't say it's necessarily womanist churches, but I do see more womanists creating their own spaces. Because you know how I say, when the table you're at is no longer serving you love, get up. And what we've been trying to continue to say is, you don't have to, I think it was Shirley Sissom said, I'm bringing my own chair to the table, but sometimes you need a new table. So we've been telling people about building your own table. And so I've seen more women doing their own things, especially since virtual is an option now. You see a lot more people doing virtual different things. It may not be a church, of course. I didn't think this was going to be a quote unquote church, but I do see more women is doing things now, and I do hope it'll be more actual, gatherings where people, not necessarily the gathering, but other places where people.
And I think that's a good point, Camilla. And so let me back up a little bit, because one of the gatherings, the gathering in St. Louis, early on, they told us that when we launched the gathering, they had been thinking about it, because it was 3 Black women who started that gathering in St. Louis. They started a week after we did. And they said it was because they saw us step out that way we did that gave them the courage to go ahead and do it. So there are, and I do think that there are more Black women, even though they may not attribute it to us, but I think seeing what we're doing is giving them some encouragement and empowering them to try something different and new. So, yeah.
Let me ask a related question, and that is that at the conference this past weekend, I was impressed by the fact that there were Muslim and Buddhist womanists.
Yes.
And I wonder if you have any contact with some of those women in terms of their work. And the second part of my question really has to do with another section of the conference, which was called Womanist Allies. And Jann has begun to touch on that. But how those of us who are not womanist identified, because we are not Black women and have been told that womanism and rightly belongs to Black women, how can womanist allies best do the work that would be helpful for you and for others? So that's really a 2-part question. One is the Muslim Buddhist, and the other is the womanist allies. If you have any thoughts on those issues.
Good.
Well, the first question, I wouldn't say we've engaged in the gathering. Now I do get, because I'm a PhD student, so I do engage their work because in my own work, but we haven't actually had no actual direct interactions, I guess, with any womanists who are Muslim or Buddhist. I do know some of the ones who are actually at the conference, but no, haven't done that. And as far as allies, we call them co-conspirators at the gatherer, because this is people who are working along with us. But one of my biggest things I always say, and Dr. Irie can say other things, but you have to be able to let a Black woman lead and follow a Black woman's leadership. Not necessarily always centering, you, and it's not, and to be clear, I want to be, we center Black, but it's not that we don't take other people's issues into consideration or anything like that in the work that we're doing. But we do center the experiences and voices of Black women. And the other thing is you got to be willing to be uncomfortable, because there are going to be a lot of times where, and it's I guess it's funny. I use funny differently. But I have a friend who came to visit the gathering. We were in person, and she's like, I can't believe, all these white people are still here. And you keep talking about white supremacy and you keep talking about all this stuff. And I was like, I know. And they still come. I mean, it's not going to be comfortable all the time. But being able to sit in the uncomfortable and to then use your privilege to make somebody else uncomfortable, not in a, but to bring about change, because, it takes using their voices as well, and their labor and all their gifts and stuff with us for us to do this work, because I believe, we all doing this work, but be able to, you don't always have to be the lead. And again, that might be uncomfortable for some people.
Yeah. And I think Dr. Jann is a really good example of how white women can come alongside and be co-conspirators, right? Because she is a ministry partner, and she uses her gifts, because as pastors, right, it doesn't matter who you are in the congregation. It doesn't matter what your race is, what your gender, sexual orientation is. As pastors, it is our responsibility to help you discover where you fit and where you, where you can best use your gifts for service, right? And so one of the things that we know and we love about Dr. Jann is her writing and ability. And so she, if you see in the book, practically all of the litanies that we use in the gathering are written by a white woman, Dr. Jann, right? She does that. That is one of her many contributions, right? This book would not be a reality, right, had it not been for Dr. Jann's editing brilliance, right?
And making sure we come along too.
Yes, and that's right, and staying on us, right? And making sure we get in because we respect her gift. We respect her as a human being, and we respect what she brings to the table. And so I want to share this. I was talking with just yesterday, another one of our white ministry partners who's a PhD student at Bright Divinity School. I'm also her coach, but she's going to begin doing some anti-racism training for white people. And because she's so good at calling her people in, right? And so I'm going to be working with her on creating something like that. So it just depends on, if you're a ministry partner with the gathering, what your gifts and what your skills are and what you're passionate about, because we want you to bring that with you. And as Camilla said, you won't come to the gathering if you can't be led by Black women. I mean, you just won't.
Jann, you had your hand up. Thank you, Dr. Irie. Did you have your hand up, Jann?
I was just, I would, using one of the reactions that I really liked what Dr. Irie was saying, but thank you. The transformative experience, they do purple table talks, and one was on the book White Fragility that some of you know, and that was so good for me. And I realized, as I had long advocated as a feminist for men to experience feminism and female images of God for their own healing from sexist culture, that I needed to experience womanism and Black women's experience centered to heal from my racism, from my white supremacy, from the culture. And so that, insight has just, hearing Black women preach every week is just amazing. And the insights they bring into the scripture. I grew up in Louisiana, and I don't think I heard a woman preach until I preached myself. And certainly not a Black woman. My dad was a preacher, and he did some pulpit exchanges with the Black Baptist pastor in this small town in Louisiana, and almost got run out of his church. But so I heard a couple of Black men, but never a Black woman preach, except maybe online or something, but not every week at the gathering. So white women need this experience. So what I would encourage you to do is not only buy the book, but come to the gathering on Saturday evenings. It's on Facebook, 6 o'clock Central, so that'd be 7 Eastern for y'all, and just experience Black women preaching. All of the proclaimers are Black women.
Wonderful. We'll make sure that's in the notes so people can join. I know one person, Monica Maher from Ecuador, said she'll be joining, so I'm sure she'll have company as well. So does anybody else have a burning question before we conclude? We are really grateful for your participation beyond the hour, not to mention how rich it has been, but I don't want to hold people up either. So anybody last comment? Or one more time, let me say thank you to the gathering, and both to the ministry partners, and also especially to those who have founded and moved it along. You are an inspiration to us, and you teach us, and you lead us, and we thank you, and you have not seen the last of us.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
And one more time for the road. This is the book. Get it, share it, and
yes,
internalize it. Those litanies, the sermons, and I'm sure some of you heard Renita Weems over the weekend when she preached. That was to fall off your chair.
That's how. Oh my gosh! Yeah.
Was that something on Saturday morning? I don't think I've heard anything like that in a long time.
Yeah, the best woman for the job is a witch.
That's right. Yes, be witches, she said. Be witches. I tell you, this white Catholic girl had to sit up and listen. I'll tell you that. That was how it worked. No, it was really amazing. Friends, thank you so much, everybody. Great to have all the water people. Very, very important to have the colleagues from the gathering, ministry partners, leaders, founders, writers. We are in your debt, and we have taken your word today. So thank you very much. And we hope to see you again. You're always welcome at Water. Let us know how we can come alongside you as co-conspirators, because we're all moving in the same direction. Thank you so much. Bye-bye now.
Have a good day.